Hi, Dave Adams here, and today I'm playing through a game of Pandemic, which, if any of you have ever, um, it's not even a Pandemic Legacy; it's just Pandemic. It's the vanilla base game. Nothing impressive about it. Nothing. Well, I mean, nothing significant about it. No expansions. Nothing. Just playing through the standard. And if you've watched anything, pretty much anything that I've done there where I've talked about Pandemic, it's not my favorite game. But at the same time, I don't deny the fact that it is a significant game. It's an important game, and there's it's a hugely popular game, especially right now with Pandemic Legacy. And the base game plays essentially how Pandemic Legacy plays. It's just it doesn't have any of the upgradable features to it. So what I want to look at today is and I'm really sticking with the vanilla set for this reason, is I want to look at essentially the game in terms of its systems. Now, I'm planning on doing the Nodes of Wisdom this week on gaming systems, but I want to look at essentially how the systems interact, what systems are essential to the functioning of the game. So there's the systems in terms of the rules. There's also systems in terms of culture and how the players interact with the board game. So try to look really, firstly, because I'm trying to understand, excuse me, because I'm trying to understand co-op games. I'm trying to look at the mechanisms and how they work that propel the game forward. How each thing interacts, how one thing changing moves another or transforms another, and I'm really trying to do this because all games are essentially systems. They're different systems interacting, and essentially, Pandemic. One of the things that's good about it is that it has a fully functioning system that acts independently of the player, but then the player's actions impact that system, and the system then in turn impacts the players and how they play. And that's what I want to start looking at. I want to start trying to explore that relationship between the board and the players, how the rules function, how the different components work together to build this all-round game, and that's essentially why I'm here. So without going too much, all I'll do is I'll take you for a quick tour around the board, and we'll have a look at some of the different things that I'll be trying to pay attention to during this game. So as you can see, I'm playing on my own, but I'm playing a four-person game. Now, one of the things that I should probably point out is that the number of cards you start with is impacted by the number of players. So that's already one significant, that's an important part of the system that is having an impact on the game. So obviously the number of players impacts how the board plays out. I'm playing with, for instance, 5 epidemic cards. So if I was to, that's the infection deck, and that's the epidemic card. The epidemic cards are contained in the player deck, and as they are revealed, they will enact this set of, well, instructions. So these are rules. These are rules on the card that come from the player deck, but impact the infection deck as well as what happens on the board. Because it goes, so when this gets turned over here, this impacts here, which also impacts that, which impacts the board. And so there's almost this flow on. Each one is a corollary of the next, so of the previous. But either way, the other reason I'm playing with 5 is because I meant to deal out 6. And as I was dealing out, I realised I hadn't given any of the players their cards, and so I gave them their cards out of the last deck, and then realised that was exactly 6 without the epidemic, so I just tossed the epidemic instead of trying to redo the whole deck again. So it was more laziness than anything, but at the same time, I'm not here to win. I'm just here to try and see how everything functions. Starting position is one of the systems in play, and turn order. So what happens is we all start in Atlanta, but turn order is just that simple clockwise, anti-clockwise sort of routine, and that is going to be impacting the game somehow. So I'm going to be trying to understand that. Lots of games try to come up with clever ways of dealing with turn order. One of the ones I really enjoy is in five tribes, which has that almost that bidding phase, or that the actions you do in the game impact the turn order you take. Of course, you got the outbreak tracker, which really it's impacted by what happens on the board, but doesn't really do anything unless it gets to here. So it's sort of a system that's working, but it doesn't impact anything else. It's really only impacted on. And the only time it impacts anything else is when you lose the game from it. So that's an interesting system on its own. So that's the sort of thing I'm looking at. I'm about to deal up. I'm going to put out my different viruses. We've got these viruses down here. Nothing has, of course, solved yet, but we will get there and see how it goes. I'll get back to you.
Okay, so I've just gotten the first epidemic card, and some early thoughts getting started into this is the hand size is obviously important. The fact that once you get to 7, you have to discard down. I'm trying to think of why that would be important, but I suspect that's to encourage the sharing of knowledge. Sharing of knowledge is really a difficult task, and I randomly drew pawns out of the box and ended up with the dispatcher, which is kind of fortunate, really. Having the dispatcher and the medic makes for a good combination, as well as the scientist. I'm actually pretty happy with the combination and the contingency plan, which I've never actually played with before. These player powers, now, there's a couple of things I think go on here. And firstly, that it actually gives the sense of playing a person. And I think that's important rather than just having generic markers and just playing a pawn on a board. I think makes a huge difference. The fact that I'm playing a person is significant. When I think about room 25, which if I look is just up there, you can't really see it, it's pretty dark, but anyway, the difference between room 25, the first edition, and room 25, the expansion, is that these character powers and the fact that the characters have titles or roles, or it's not the function of dispatch, it's the dispatcher, it's the scientist, it's the contingency planner, and in the legacy game it's you actually get to give them a name. I think that's important. I think that personalizes it. I think that makes it more engaging for the person. However, I think the sharing of knowledge is meant to be an important part. Being able to get to a city, share knowledge. I think the hand limit really encourages that rather than just waiting until you have enough cards. You're better off sharing knowledge before you lose them or have to decide between two really good cards. Additionally, so here we've got now the epidemic, which what I've realised is firstly is that it's actually one less card that you draw. It's still drawn from the deck, don't get me wrong, and if this deck runs out, we lose the game. But it's one less card to your hand. So it's actually it's a handicap in that it's disadvantaging the player in their hand size. So that's one thing. Here's the impact now. We hit that, and now we have to do the whole. We increase the infection rate marker forward 1 space. So here we go, 1 space. We infect, draw the bottom card from the infection deck, put that card on top, 3 cubes in that city, discard that card, and then we intensify. Shuffle the cards in the infection discard pile and put them on top of the infection deck, which means then we do the whole we do the infection mode. So now what we've done is we've added 3 cubes with the potential of an outbreak straight away. We've still got the potential for an outbreak, so now we've got 2 potential outbreaks happening, which will impact our outbreak meter should they get hit. So now we've added 3 cubes. We're added to this deck. Playing the thing, the longer this goes on, the more cards get in here, the more chances of drawing one of these out. This is now a probability set, so it's a randomizer. But now we're looking at probabilities. What's the probability of drawing one of these other cards that have come out? I've got a 2 in however many are there. I haven't actually counted, but a 2, like say, a 2 in 15 chance of drawing, one of the cards. That's but this is me here, so that the chances are even higher. So okay, so that's now just the pressure starting to mount. You can see I've already got some stations up and going, which is good, thanks to my contingency planner, but we'll see how this goes. Now this is going to impact the board directly because I'm going to draw that card, put it on top, add 3 cubes. So now I've affected the board. Now I'm increasing the probability of hitting an outbreak. We'll see how we go. Okay, so it was Shanghai that we drew. Now we're going to go to the infection deck. Now, one of the things that should be noted is that now, because I've shuffled those cards, placed them back on top, I'm not actually getting to a whole bunch of these cities. Now, these cities at the start of the game, all potential victims, but further we get into the game, it's going to be the same cities which are more likely to infect. Now that works thematically, I think, because if there's infection there, it's more likely that infection is going to continue to outbreak. But I think this now becomes part of building the pressure, which incentivizes the player to want to actually perform the action of getting to these quicker. Because if we don't get onto these quickly, this is going to keep happening. This is going to create more and more opportunities for outbreaks, which is going to take us to dead. But if we do manage this, those cards now become breaks. They become relief. So if we've got a lot of red and we cure red and red comes out, it's not a big issue. We can manage it, especially if we can eradicate the virus and have 0 red coming out. So when we see a red, it means nothing essentially. So this is actually incentivizing the player to perform the necessary tasks of the game rather than just expecting a more held back sort of restrictive play where I just try and gather resources slowly over a long period of time and then just go for the big push. This is saying you need to get onto this and you need to get onto it now. So we'll see what's going to happen. We've got Soul. All right. Let's see. Okay, that's a problem because now if that outbreaks, that's getting hit as well. Mumbai. Let's check that out. Mumbai. There we are, over here. Sorry, losing my perspective a little. And finally, whew. Oh, hang on, I only needed 2. Whoops. Thank goodness it's only me playing. I haven't spoiled it for anyone. So just the 2. Phew, I need to do something about this. So I'll get onto that, and I'll get back to you. Okay, so this is important. Now, my very next player was a character over on this side of the board. Their very first card they pulled up, my medic pulls up, is an epidemic. So that's just the random order of the deck. So obviously I've shuffled the 2 piles, and one of them has come right at the bottom, and the other one has come right at the top, and so they're right next to each other. So now I'm guaranteed an outbreak, and red is going to get a little bit messy. So now I've intensified the deck, and I'm pretty much assured of an outbreak next turn. This should be interesting. So now I don't have. Now I have a Mumbai has 2, but if I hit either of the 2, the one that I pull up or Seoul, Seoul's going to be the worst because Seoul's going to also cause Shanghai to outbreak as well. So that's going to be bad news. Yeah, I'll let you know how it goes. Okay, so what ended up happening is I forgot that I had resilient population, which is I can remove one card in the infection discard pile from the game, and I can do it as part in between the infect and the intensify steps. So what I did is I removed Sol, which meant that I was guaranteed Montreal, and instead of using, well, I couldn't use my contingency plan to do anything, but simply meant that I took Montreal as a hit. Now, what that means board-wise, the board state has gone from red being a huge area, concern now that this blue is a huge concern, especially if I hit an epidemic anytime soon. So I guess I'll be thinking about what I do with my medic pretty soon. We'll have to think about that. All right, so this is the final game state, and we got all 5 epidemics out. We were down to however many cards. That's where the outbreak tracker got to. This is the state of the board. Los Angeles, Miami was still yet to outbreak. That was the biggest threat. Those last 2 were the last ones to come in. But overall, I did start to feel a bit of pressure. These are the cards that all got reused by the contingency planner and consequently got removed from the game. These bottom 2 cards were removed from the game through resilient population being used twice. I built 3, 2 additional stations across the board, and that was just a matter of using the one of the government grants. Overall, it built up to some level of tension. I did feel a bit of pressure that I wasn't going to actually survive, but in the end, the ending sort of came rather quickly, and I sort of worked out that I was going to survive and how I was going to do it. I even had airlift come out, which meant that I could reuse that twice using the contingency plan, which made it just a little bit even easier. So I think 5 is relatively hard. I think if there was one more in there, it's possible I wouldn't have survived. Hard to say, because it's still a full thing. I could have possibly made. It's possible that it could have been left in there. I don't know. I'm not sure that you would survive if all 6 came out at once. Still, that's the state of the board. That's how it turned out. And I will close up with some thoughts and try and ask some questions about the game. So, for me, trying to think through the different systems of the game and why it works, it's clear that it's got a really smooth running system. Each part sort of links into each other really well. And the multiple ways of losing, the limited number of ways of winning, the one way of winning. You only have to cure, you don't have to eradicate. And there are a few interesting choices in that. Like, I've always complained that Pandemic doesn't lead to a lot of risk reward. The only caveat to that is I'd say that you could choose to try and push for an eradication, which does create some benefit. But for the most part, I think if you're really trying to do a full all 6 epidemics, you're probably not rushing for an eradication unless it just somehow manages it. And I managed an eradication on the red, which I have no idea what that is. It's the red virus. Bird flu? I don't know. Everyone tries to name them. I have no idea. Just the red one. So anyway, I guess for me, it's still not overly satisfying in that it still feels like I'm just solving a puzzle, and I really don't see why I would want to play it with more than one person. I mean, having extra people there could work, and it does, but it's just more people to contend with, and usually I think if I'm doing this sort of game, then I'd rather do it on my own. That for me, it's not so much a game as just a resetting a puzzle that has multiple starting points, if that makes sense. Like, it's I don't know what the proper term for it would be, but like a never-changing puzzle. And that's kind of how it plays out. And there are a few moments where you just go, well, it just comes down to whatever card draws, and that's not such a bad thing. Like, people really enjoy that, and I should stress that. Like, people really enjoy that.
for me, I just want to know that my agency has a lot more of an impact. In terms of the systems of the game, the reason this is important, the reason I'm trying to ask questions about this, is because all games are fundamentally a variety of systems interacting. So when I think about the systems of Pandemic, I'm trying to contemplate how one impacts the other. And it's clear to me like that there's a set collection element. The viruses going onto the board it's almost like this, and this is one of the things I think is rather clever about the game, is that it's almost a reversal area control. So you're trying to stop the virus from controlling the board. And in a sense, it's still area control, like even if removing a piece is still having control over the board. So dominance in an area is getting rid of all of the pieces. And you could almost imagine it as if you had your own color, say transparent, or let's say pink, for example, that every time you removed one of their pieces, you could put down a pink piece and it would still have the same effect. That's area control. It's still essentially area control in that sense, but the board is playing area control. I think the way it provides opportunity for the board to explode is really clever. The interaction between the cities, so you draw one from the bottom, that's a guaranteed 3, and it goes into the group that go on top. And I think what that covers is that even if over the course of between epidemics you've gone through and you've gotten rid of all, or at least gotten enough cubes off the board so that no matter what comes up, it's only going to be one added and it's not going to cause an outbreak, there is always the potential for an outbreak with every epidemic card. So now what you have is there's still some potential of blowing out. And I saw that with Montreal, I think it was. Washington. So Washington hits the board and it outbreaks, and then it outbreaked again. And so now I had 2 cubes in all the areas around it. So I think that's useful because that created the ramp up. Having that ability for something to go wrong. And I'm okay with that. Like I don't complain about the randomness in that sense. Like that sort of thing I think works, and it does create escalation. Like I like one of the loss conditions is the number of outbreaks. Losing the player deck is a loss condition. What else is there? Using up all your cubes, instead of saying I'll just find extra cubes somewhere if you're out of cubes. No, the number of cubes you have is a loss condition. Sorry, the multiple loss conditions I think give the players lots of things to think about. So in terms of the multiple loss conditions as a system, it's dividing the attentions of the players. Now, when you think about player attention, the brain is actually only capable of being fully attentive to one thing at a time, and so by dividing attention, you're creating a cognitive load, and I think that's useful. I think that creates good pressure on the players. Obviously, if you overload them, then that's too hard. But making it singular too simple is, obviously boring. So hitting that balance is good. And I think for the most part, Pandemic hits that balance. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm talking myself into loving the game. I'm not. I still don't enjoy it. I'm just trying to appreciate the genius of the game behind it. And that's okay. Like, not everyone has to like the same game, but at least understand what's going on. So there are some things. The different actions you can take create obviously benefits for the players. I think the fact that every player takes the same actions, like I think that limitation is useful. And the player action then, like what your character does, adds the variety, gives you some additional agency as you you yourself have some contribution to make. So it's not like you're all just choosing between one of 4 actions. You're choosing between one of 5 actions, and one of those actions is unique to your character. As a system, I think that works. I think you can overdo it by having each character so individual. It's hard to say why. Then I can see that the player deck. So if I was to ask some core questions, my question would be, what could I change, or what could I change and still keep the feeling of pandemic? And I'd have to say that this is a pretty streamlined game, so it doesn't feel like I could change an awful lot and expect the game to stay and to feel like pandemic. I guess overall, I could change the number of cards in hands. I could change how interaction, like trading cards, goes on. One of my obvious complaints is how you trade cards just seems ridiculous, that you could have to be in the city to trade the card, but then without that limitation, the game's just too easy. And that for me isn't a fully well functioning system. I understand why the limitation's there. The limitation is there to stop the game just being way too simple. But as an actual function in the game, it just feels ridiculous. Both of us have to be in the city, so to trade the cards, it's a core function of the game. It just, to me, it doesn't work. Even though clearly I understand why it has to be that way, I don't like that part of it. It just seems dumb. I can discard a city card to fly to that city. That kind of makes sense, I guess. I don't know. I find movement can be really restrictive, and you have to think that through. So I don't mind that. So the way the board interacts is in terms of the design, the system of how everything connects is sort of good. I'm just trying to get the board into sight there. You're looking at how everything's connected, and it restricts movement. It restricts your ability to just jump from one side of the board to the other. I'm okay with that. I like the idea that you have to create these bases to jump across the board. However, I feel like, having that card in there, the government grant, was the only way that I got those other stations on the board. I wouldn't have gotten players over to discard a card. It's frustrating because it's hand management and you need set collection, but then you have to use cards to build things, and he's sort of I guess this is the frustrating part. I had players with, each character had 2 of something, and you kind of go, well, you can't. You're so limited in your ability to trade. You're so limited in your ability to build, that to do any of those things would cause you to lose the necessary cards. I think all the blues were out, but they were in everybody else's hand. I had to use all the different powers of my people to get there. I feel like if I had a different group of people, it wouldn't have worked. I wouldn't have gotten there. I didn't feel like it was. I don't know. It didn't feel like it didn't work for me for some reason. I'm not 100% sure why. I'm not sure what I could change and still make it feel like pandemic. I kind of want to do some more cool stuff with the characters, or at least the trading has to change somehow. What do I think the most important system in the game is? Is it the set collection? Is it the movement? Is it the area control? Is it the infection deck? Well, I'm going to have to say, I'd probably say the most important one would be the player deck. simply because the player deck dictates what happens in the infection deck. Even though the infection deck is always ticking away, the player deck has a direct impact on the infection deck, which then has a direct impact on the area control. And the player deck works both for the player and against the player. So I'm going to say that's probably that's probably the main mechanic in the thing that really, or the main system that really drives everything else. Otherwise, the infection deck would just tick over one at a time, no big issue. But the player deck then decides, no, stop right there. 3 cubes on this one, thank you. And reinfect, escalate everything else. So the player deck is the part that's escalating the game, pushing it along, driving it along. It's also your time mechanic, because if it runs out, the game's lost. So, there's but then it's also, you're so dependent on it for the cards to score. So, I don't know. It's obviously well balanced because it works, But for me, that's got to be the key one. That's got to be the key mechanic. So I've got to really think about that player deck, and I'm going to think about its impact on the board. So that's just my thinking, trying to go through a game and really start to process some of the systems, trying to understand how things interact, how they interact with me as a player, how they create pressure for the game. And I think we've started to uncover a bit there. So I hope that has at least given an insight into how I'm playing games and trying to get something out of them. But look, if you saw something that maybe could help me out, some thoughts on the games, I'd love to hear them. Put them in the comment section below. If you like what we're doing here, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Dave Adams. We'll see you then.